and welcome back to Map the Maze. Today is the last in the Summer Book Club, and I wanted to share a book with you, splitting. It's the new edition, second edition by Eddy and Randi, Kreger, which talks about, the title is Protecting Yourself While Divorcing Someone with Borderline or Narcissistic Personality Disorder. I guess what I would say, as I have heard Eddy say himself when teaching this subject, and particularly around looking at high conflict personalities in conflict and in divorce, is his work is not about diagnosis. So I think this is helpful if you are experiencing somebody that maybe has had a diagnosis of some type of personality disorder, who is displaying traits with those personality disorders, or who is displaying behaviour. Because at the end of the day, this is not going to make you into an armchair psychologist and able to diagnose anyone, nor is that necessarily helpful. What it does do is it gives you some ideas about how to manage the behaviours that you're experiencing. So he has a few key messages in this book that I think are helpful for anyone who is finding the behaviour of their ex difficult to manage. One is to stop and think, that before you react to the provocation, to the behaviour, to the trigger, stop and think, what is most constructive for me in this moment? And I think that's a message that a lot of the books this summer have really echoed, which is that there are, undeniably, we have emotional reactions to things that happen. I guess what I would say is, the question is, does that help advance you closer towards achieving your goals, or does it move you backwards? And if it moves you backwards, then stop, take a pause, think, is this what I really want to be doing? The second piece of advice is that because this is not diagnosis, definitely do not say to the other person, oh, I think you are a narcissist, or I think you have a personality disorder. That will not lead to any constructive conversations. Yeah, that can be extremely destructive, not to mention provocative. And so this is really more about giving you tools so that you can try and navigate for yourself what is happening. The other thing he talks about is to be what he calls assertive, to not retreat from the things that are important, but also really importantly to pick your battles. There are some disagreements in conflict, and I think what's interesting is conflict is not this sort of one amorphous experience. There will be, within the greater conflict, there will be skirmishes, there will be battles, there'll be sort of mini provocations. And the question is, which of those should you respond to? How should you respond to them? And which do you maybe just need to let go, because you have your eye on the bigger prize, which is achieving the goals that you have, that you need to achieve through the conflict. And so I think that's a really good piece of advice, which is to pick your battles. Because I think one of the challenges that I see with people often in mediation is everything is a provocation, everything is triggered, and then everything is reacted to. And yes, some of those things undeniably provocative, undeniably inflammatory. But the challenge is, if everything is reacted to at the same level, it can derail trying to find a resolution to that. So I think picking your battles, really important. And the other thing he talks about, which is something that is hard to do, we have all experienced this, but is really incredibly important, which is to manage your own emotions. And whether that means getting help from a counselor or a psychologist, learning new tools, getting some CBT tricks, whatever it is, finding a way to manage and regulate your own emotions can help. Now, he brings up an interesting point, which is that behaviours are contagious. So you know what it's like if you come into a room and somebody has had a terrible day and they're in a really bad mood. And that negativity, that emotion, that frustration, you can start feeling frustrated, you can start feeling negative. And so even if you come in a perfectly neutral mood, you can start becoming frustrated as that person talks about what's happened to them, and then maybe reacts to you in a way which is frustrated or frustrating. And so there's a lot of research around how our behavior, how the way that we behave is contagious. One of the, I guess, the negative impacts of that is that if somebody is in a negative frame of mind, is angry, is frustrated, is triggering, that can make you more reactive, more frustrated, more triggered, more angry. But the converse is true, and that's what he's talking about. So he's saying if you can learn how to regulate your emotions, there's a chance that you can help them to regulate their emotions, to behave in a more constructive, to behave in a more positive, at least potentially neutral manner. And I think that's a really interesting idea, that we also have the ability to impact other people. And that can be a choice that we make to impact them in a positive way, not because you want them to be happy necessarily if you are in a conflict or separating or divorcing, but because you want them to be in a more collaborative, a more cooperative, a more constructive frame of mind. And I think that is a really interesting idea. So one thing I would say is this book, Splitting, again, does focus a lot on how to deal with the court process. So if you are curious about what that process will look like, what the experience might be like, it is obviously an American book, so it is talking about an American court process, but there are definitely lessons for other jurisdictions about just, I think, how almost how disempowering it can be going to court, in the sense that it's not you explaining the terrible things that have happened. It's very much focused on legal process and procedure, and I think that he makes quite clear. In the book, there's a lot of time spent on advice around how to deal with the court process, around tactical decisions, documentation, recording, chronologies, things like that. He does talk a little bit about how to approach somebody with potential personality disorder or traits or behavior in a mediation. And I think that's also worth reading. But I guess what's helpful is not every case, particularly if somebody does display a lot of behavioral traits that are high conflict, can be resolved in mediation. And so having a sense of what does it look like if we don't get this done from a realistic perspective, I think can be really helpful, because it enables people to make a choice based on informed decision making, which is sort of the bedrock of mediation, which is, okay, I don't really want to get it done through mediation because this is proving very difficult or impossible. What does it look like if we don't? And this, I think, does give you a bit of a sense of what would a court process look like with the high conflict person. Because the reality is, going to court, coming to mediation doesn't change anyone fundamentally, but it's a different process. And I think this gives you a little bit of an idea of what would that look like. How can you navigate within that process? So again, last book of the Summer Book Club. Bill Eddy has written so much in this area and has really contributed so much to our understanding of how to work with people who are high conflict. So I would recommend visiting his website, the High Conflict Institute. There's a blog, so there's lots of articles that are short, but I think really helpful. One thing he does talk about again in here is trying to focus on what you can control. And I know that is such a cliche. You can control you can't control other people. But he really, I think, highlights why is that important and how can you use that to your benefit. So how can you, remaining calm and focused and positive, impact the other person beyond just the fact that I think it helps you, it helps each of us if we can stay like that in conflict, but how can that potentially influence the other person for the good? So last book of the summer, it's been really fun sharing some of the books that I've enjoyed, some of the books that are new to me, as this, because it's the second edition, some books that are old and familiar friends who I go back to time and again when I feel a bit lost sometimes. For me, I mean, reading, and this is possibly generational, but for me, reading is one of the ways that I really find helpful in terms of absorbing information. So I'm doing something at the moment where I am trying to learn something online, and there is no book, which is driving me crazy. And the learning segments, the videos, are all in 3 to 6 minute increments, which apparently I cannot learn in. So I'm finding it virtually impossible to learn in that way. So for me, that's another reason why I think the books are really important, that it's something that for me is at least information that I find easier to absorb. But also I think there are a lot of people who would like to get some help, would maybe like to talk about some of these issues, but who struggle to either have the resources, maybe they're unavailable where you're living, or maybe it's just too difficult. You don't want to have to go to a counsellor, you don't want to go to a psychologist. So for me, I think a lot of these books from the Summer Book Club are things that I think are really helpful to people who are experiencing separation and divorce and who maybe want a little bit of a hand or a little bit of an idea about how to go about this without, I guess, going at full scale and going to see a counsellor or a psychologist. So I hope you've enjoyed these books. The next couple of months are going to be interesting. So I have already chosen the topic for next month. So September is going to be all about mindset. What mindsets are helpful if you are coming to mediation to manage your arrangements for separation and divorce? So next month will be quite different, and no more books until next summer probably. But I hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope that some of these books will be helpful to you in your journey. I would say some of them, may not be the right book for you, may not be a good fit, but all of them have something definitely. I can think of clients who could benefit from each of these books and from the insights and the wisdom. So have a great week, and I will see you in September with Mindset. Thanks a lot, and bye.